are your options to pay for the retirement you want to experience? That is the entire premise of this episode of the 4-Quarter Career. We spent the first episode of this series explaining what the 4-quarter career means, detailing how going from 25 to 65 only gives you 40 years in order to plan for the rest of your life, in order to save up or invest or earn enough to retire the way you'd like to retire. In episode 2, we talked about how you want to live. We live a certain way right now at whatever point in the 4 quarters you're currently living in, but is that what you'd like to continue when you retire? Are there parts of it you want to keep? Are there parts of life you want to add into your regular routine? What are you working for? What are you aiming towards? Spend time dreaming about it so that we can design around that. And then once we had that dream, in episode 3, we talked about how much you need to make. And it started with how much you need to make today. How much is your future life actually going to cost? And I don't mean in theory. I don't mean you hope. I mean right now, look at the numbers. How much does that car cost? How much does your home cost, not only to own, but to maintain? How many kids do you want to help? How many grandkids do you want to support? Are you paying tuitions? Are you paying for healthcare? Are you paying for vacations? What is the cost, at least in 2025, of the life you'd like to live once you stop working? And when you think about where you are in the 4 quarters, when you come up with your dream life and the price of it, we have to start talking about how to earn enough to sustain it. That is the point of episode 4. What are your options in order to make enough money to live the life you want to live? Now, the simplest explanation is that you need money. And if you have been in any sort of business school, even if you've been on Instagram business, the 2 types of money we talk about most often are active income and passive income. And those 2 types of incomes are often presented as a binary. Active being you work for your money, and passive being like the money just showed up. There's no overlap. There's no combination of the 2. It is either one or the other. Where in reality, I would say active and passive income isn't a binary and more of a spectrum. And I would stop honestly telling people active versus passive income, and I would reframe active income as income tied directly to your working hours, and passive income on the spectrum is not tied directly to your working hours. Because of course there's an example of like, I'm an hourly employee, I only get paid for the hours I show up. And on the other hand, you might be receiving Social Security, where there is nothing else you need to do but be alive and collect another check. But there is so much in between those 2 things. There is so much in between those 2 extremes, and that is where most of our retirements lie. Let's start on the far right with active income. If when you think about retirement, you think about working all the time, you don't ever want to stop working, this is pretty much where your funds are going to come from. They are going to come from your job. So when you start to imagine life when you are 75 and 85, something you really need to prioritize right now, number 1 would be your health. You need to keep yourself in working shape if you're going to continue working at this rate for the rest of your life. On the other end of the spectrum, if you want a more guaranteed return, then we have to invest heavily now in programs that offer that. Those would be programs like Social Security, right? Investing in long-term annuities or invested in dividend-paying stocks. You want to put your money in things that have absolute guaranteed returns. They might not be as high as things in the middle of the spectrum or potentially as your active income might be, but there is very little risk involved. And then there's a whole section in the middle of the spectrum where it's not quite active and based on your hourly rate, but it's not quite guaranteed. You don't have to do anything but check the pay stub. This is where investments are born. This is where real estate is and your 401k. This is where businesses are and any of your IRAs. When you have an investment that has a massive upside but does require some sort of management on your perspective, you're in the middle of the spectrum. You're not on any of the two edges. Your total retirement will likely be a mix of these funds. So depending on where you are in your 4-quarter career, it's time for us to start strategizing which bucket we're gonna put the majority of our effort into. I'm gonna start with myself. I mentioned to you guys in the last video that $7,000 a month was my family's current number. That's how much we needed to live the life we are currently leading with our homes and our cars and our date nights. But a big chunk of that is going to debt. Out of the $7,000 we bring in every month, $4,000 of that is going to debt. So when I think about my final number, I'm very comfortable staying at $7,000. I am very comfortable continuing to make that same amount of money, understanding that more than half of it is now free to do whatever we would like to do because there are no debt payments. But how do I get there? How do my husband and I make $7,000 a month so that we can live comfortably when we retire? One of my first steps is to look at how I'm already living my life and seeing if there are any strategies or options I can pick from that. My husband is a professor. He loves his job. He works for the state of Virginia. As such, he has a retirement account with them. That is an option we can tap into because he plans to stay there his entire career. He plans to continue working for them. So that is one of the options we can use to get to that $7,000. I currently work for myself and do not have that option right now. I don't have an employer-based retirement system, so that's not something I can tap into. He can. However, even though I don't have an employer-based retirement fund, I have IRAs. I have self-directed funds that I could use for my retirement. My husband's option falls further to the left in that more guaranteed return part of the spectrum, where my personal IRA option falls more in the middle. I still have to decide what that money is invested into. I still have to manage that fund, manage those investments in order to get the highest return I can. But it's not just my job. It's not just his job. We can look at our greater life to see, again, is there anything inherently built into the system as it stands? Something that might pop up for you guys is inheritances. Do you have money coming from your elders? Do you have any funds coming from aunts or parents or uncles or grandparents? Those things can be considered in addition to your retirement, an influx of cash that can be put away for you to retire comfortably. But say you don't have any of those. Say when you look around, you do not have a healthy retirement plan with your employer and you do not have any inheritances coming in. What do you do next? I said it in an earlier video, but the next thing you would do is look at your budget to see if you have any discretionary income. In order to invest in any of these buckets, you need money. In order to save for your retirement, you need a little excess now to be your foundation for later. So when you look at your budget, how much can you save per month? How much less can you live on now so that we can put it in one of these vehicles to generate some income for you for the future? If you do not have additional income, we need to have a hard conversation about the kind of life you're living. Because yes, for a lot of you, at least here in America, you have money being put aside into Social Security. But I feel like every other day we're talking about how Social Security may or may not be there by the end of your particular 4 quarters. So if it's not, then what? If there is no extra money, then you cannot sustain this pace, honestly, as is, but for sure once you stop working. Some of you might have little things you can tweak in order to make a little extra money. Some of you might have to make massive lifestyle changes. When I looked at my budget for the first time and realized I was in a deficit, and based on my savings, I only had a year or 2 before that deficit wiped me out completely, I had to make the decision to get a roommate. I had to make a decision to sell my car. I had to make a decision to get a different job, to work part-time. I had to do something drastic. I had to do something big and, at least for me, seemingly radical in order to break the cycle I was in, because there was an excess for me today, therefore sure would not be enough to sustain me for tomorrow. But some of you might not be as big. Some of you have to order a little less DoorDash and cook a little more at home. Some of you have to spread out your vacations to every other year instead of every year. Some of you maybe have to put your kids on a budget. A little less radical, but just as important. And once we find that extra money, once we find that extra $200, $500, $1,000 per month, now we get to decide, okay, where do I want to put these funds? That decision will be based on a few factors. The first will be your risk factor. If you don't have a high risk tolerance, then you need to be more towards the left side of that spectrum. You need more guaranteed returns. This is your company matched 401k. This is index funds. This is dividend paying stocks. You need something that is going to give you money and not stress you out. Maybe not a lot of money, but because it's guaranteed, you feel more comfortable because you are more of a lower risk investor. The key with this section is to make sure the amount that you are inserting is going to give you the return you need on the back end. When I found an extra $500 to $700 a month, yes, I looked at dividend paying stocks, but I learned that, for a $1,000 stock, if I was getting $1 back a month, if I was getting $5 back a month, it wasn't giving me what I was hoping to get. Where there were other vehicles that had the potential to give me a little bit more money per month, but did come with a little higher risk. Now, if I was able to put aside $1,000 per month or $2,000 per month, these might have been okay to get me to the $7,000. Do you see what I'm saying? If you need more money in your retirement, but aren't able to invest a lot into these low risk assets, you might have to reconsider either the amount you're trying to get to or the vehicle you're using to get there. But maybe you have a little higher of a risk tolerance. Next, you start to think about the time you have to manage these assets. That's kind of where I landed. I had a little more time on my hands, especially because I wasn't working as much, and I had a higher risk tolerance because I wanted a greater return, and that pushed me towards real estate. I started investing in real estate because with my limited funds, but a little excess time, it felt like it was the biggest bang for my buck. I was able to buy properties for a few $1,000s down, live in them for a little bit, and then rent them out to make a couple $100s. Those couple $100s I would then save to invest into the next property. I didn't spend any of that money even though I could, unlike, your government-funded assets or your employer-funded assets. Those have to stay where they are until you retire. I used real estate to make a profit that I could spend today, but chose instead to continue investing in order to build up my portfolio. Eventually, I got to the point with my portfolio where I was actually able to leave my job now, within that first quarter. And I didn't mind living off of that money because compared to maybe a 401k, I wasn't lessening the value of my asset by using some of the profit. With stocks, you have to sell them in order to access that equity. Not quite the same thing with real estate because of the cash flow. Now, I don't want to confuse you here because yes, real estate does have the potential to make more money than things further to the left on the spectrum. However, there are risks involved. There is maintenance that needs to be done on a property. There are renters that sometimes don't pay. Tax laws change, property laws change. Things can shift on a dime that is not quite the same over here. Again, the potential is higher, but so is the risk. And finally, we can talk about the lifestyle you want to lead. If you don't want to have to keep up with these assets as you retire, then maybe we don't go so far towards the right. We don't find assets that require a lot more of your work in order to maintain. But for some, that's exactly where you want to be. You want to be working your job. You want to be working in your gift for as long as you possibly can. Deciding where you want the bulk of your income to come from is the purpose of this step. So take the time now to journal about that for yourself. And I also want to make sure you include anyone else that might be impacted by this decision. For some people, it's your partner. You need to speak with them about how you guys plan to live in your retirement. For some, it's your children. How you imagine your future life involves them, impacts them. If that's true, then this isn't a decision that you should be making on your own. Or maybe it requires your parents. Maybe you need to speak to your elders to figure out what their next steps are because that will have a direct impact on what your next steps are. For some of you, it's your employer. You need to renegotiate your contract or you need to find another employer who can match the pace you want to run at in order to be prepared for when you leave the working class. And for some of you, it's your community. You need to help design a situation that benefits you when you retire. Look around your community. Can you get to the things you'd want to get to if you were 60 or 70 or 80 years old? Are there activities and events designed for the elderly, or are they kind of pushed away, pushed somewhere else out of view so that they are not bothering or impacting the rest of the citizens? Is the city or state you want to live in friendly towards the life you want to live? So from a meta view, that is retirement in a nutshell. Figuring out how much time you have left, what you're aiming for, how much it costs, and investing in vehicles to match that cost. So yeah, in theory, it's pretty simple, but what next? How is it different if you have 10 years left in your game versus 35? How is it different if you're on pace or if you're way behind? How is it different if you're single or married, a parent or a caretaker? In episode 5, I want to talk about how to prioritize your next step. Because this is a lot of information, simple as that may be, it is still difficult to organize. And from there, maybe give you a few other resources you can check out as you figure which part of the spectrum you want to prioritize. Hopefully this switch from a binary to a more broad scale spectrum is helpful, but if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. So until next time, I'm Deandra with the 4-Quarter Career, and I will see you in the next video.